Hey, I'm Stan Proko. Welcome to Proko. Today I have a special guest, Anthony Jones, aka Robot Pencil. He's worked for companies like Blizzard, Sony, Hasbro. His creature designs are insanely good. I was especially amazed by how much he can do in just a few minutes. So I asked him to share some of that with you guys. In this video, he's going to show you how working quickly can benefit concept design. If you want to see more of his work, go to robotpencil.net.
Hello everybody, my name is Anthony Jones and I'm going to be doing a tutorial for you guys on quick painting. It's 5 minutes. We're going to go ahead and start and I'm going to talk about it as I go. When you have speed, it helps you make choices much quicker, but the speed that you'll need in our industry is really valuable because you'll be told a lot of the time to make changes and those changes might be dramatic. You have to have some sort of skill to be able to make those changes, make those iterations. And speed helps with this because if you can just kind of go ahead and paint quickly, you can probably get the design or a new version of the design ready to go in a short amount of time. When you have like a director or someone who's in charge telling you, hey, we want you to add feathers or whatever it may be, with the ability to just kind of paint quickly, you can either make those changes, which I'm going to actually demonstrate in the second one, or you can basically just paint in a new one. A lot of times people are afraid of starting over or starting a new drawing because they're afraid that they're going to make a huge mistake or that all the work that they spent on the first one was worthless or basically a waste of time. But the reality is that every time you paint and every time you practice, it's not a waste of time. It's actually more practice and more knowledge that you're gathering over that time. Now, you might not like what you've made, you might not appreciate what you've made, but it is adding to your pool of knowledge. And so starting over isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just means that maybe you made some bigger mistakes that it's just going to take more time to clean them up than to basically just start over. And this actually happened to me once. So I was working at a studio, and during the studio time, I was painting this painting for about 5 hours. I was really feeling good about it. But normally I like to do sketches, and sometimes I'll do sketches in between my actual work. So I had this 5-hour painting, and then I had my sketches. So it was lunch, so I decided to save, and then I saved both files, and then I went to lunch. Then I came back, I realized that I accidentally saved over it. And so now I was just kind of stuck, right? At least that's how I felt. But then I, had to buckle down because it's still a job and I had to get it done. And I decided, I'm just going to have to do it again. I remember calling my wife, telling her, I'm going to be staying a little later. I'm sorry, but, I made a huge mistake. And she was like, oh my gosh, no, And so then I went ahead and started over. As I was starting over, it became very clear to me that the reason why the first painting took 5 hours was not because it needed to take 5 hours, it's because there were so many mistakes. Because the second time through, not only did I paint it faster, it was better. And now that I had time, and now that I had this ability to kind of just sit down and just work on it, I felt liberated. I felt like, I can really make some changes. And that's when I learned the power of speed and the power of just kind of making sure to just get the work done. And if you feel bad, just start over. And then I just kept on practicing. After that, I just kept on practicing speed. And then now I'm, here painting things in under 5 minutes. There you go. Time's up. Best practices. Like, what can we do to get better at speed? One of the first things that I usually do is try to have pretty good marks on the very first marks that I make. I'm gonna make like another bird creature. And so like having an overall like shape and pattern from the start is going to be super helpful. You might notice that I'm not like stressing out. I'm just kind of painting in, taking breaks, setting my timer down and putting it in the right position. Because these are best practices to like feel confident, feel that you have control. This is not easy, I get it. And so this is why, it's called best practices, or at least I'm assuming this is why. Because these are things you should be practicing, because if you do it often, then you'll just be second nature to you. And so stuff like, laying out an overall shape, like that's what I did, feeling comfortable with my workspace, that's what I did. Like just getting everything set up so that way I don't feel fidgety or I feel anxious, because that anxiety might mess up my drawing, right? I just feel comfortable, and so that way when I get into it, I don't stress out. And I can have my mind fully running the show in the way that I want it to run, right? Which is basically trying to paint this kind of cool, weird beard creature. A beard creature? Sorry, bird creature. See, my mind's so focused that I'm saying the wrong words. It's only focused on the painting. Which will be another thing that you might notice is that I'm talking while I'm painting. And the reason why this isn't possible for me, which probably is not possible for others, is because, I am a teacher by trade. And so, again, this is just more best practices. I've taught myself how to be able to paint and talk. I'm sure you've seen this with many other instructors that are worth, viewing. But, this is another thing that I practiced when I was in school, whenever I was hanging out with my friends. And this is just something that I continuously do. Another thing that I think is really good for best practices is practicing outside of the work that you need to do. So for instance, this is something that I've kind of done before. I've painted these types of things many times. And so it's not that challenging for me, not because it's easy, but because I've trained for it. Just like an Olympic athlete, let's say Olympic runner, probably can run a couple miles, no problem. Not because, again, running a couple miles is super easy, but because they're trained. They're trained individuals, and running a couple miles is what they do. And so if you find an artist that you see painting something that looks so miraculous, something that looks almost magical, kind of like they have to have something, because whenever you do it, it's just incredibly challenging. But the reality is that they've just practiced and practiced and practiced. And that's the biggest difference between you and them, is that they might have spent way more time practicing the various fundamentals that you are not practicing. And this is why they are, demolishing you, per se, in this particular field that you feel demolished in, right? The reality is no, they just have a little bit more practice, a little more skill. It's pretty simple. And so I like to remind students of this, because sometimes whenever someone sees someone that paints really good, really effective, they look at themselves and they become incredibly insecure. And these insecurities are justified, because, you aren't as good as you may want to be. But they are not insecurities that you should harp on. You should let them sit still and just build up, because then you should follow up that with, okay, I understand why I feel this way, but it is because I need more practice. I need to feel more secure with the way I feel about my work. So the way to get this, I need to practice, and just trust that this will work. And this is why I'll almost always recommend that people should invest more time in practicing things like patience, resilience, versus trying to find motivation and inspiration. Because if you're looking for motivation and inspiration, you're just not going to find it every day. There's going to be days where you just don't want to draw. And that's really what makes the difference, is that, time's up, this is as far as I got. That's going to make the difference, because if you feel inspired, then it's easy, right? It's easy to just kind of get to work. But if you don't, this is what makes the difference between those who really push themselves and succeed at the things that they want to succeed in, versus those who don't. It's nothing more than that. Because if you don't feel like doing it, but yet you still do it, then that's really powerful, and that shows a lot of discipline, and that's what you should put more of your time and money in. Anyways, let's move on to the next one, talk about some design challenges. Let's do 5 minutes again. The design challenges are usually whenever you are put into a position where, let's say, your design has a huge amount of detail or texture or whatever, and then someone, like I mentioned in the previous section, wants you to make a major change, and these major changes are change the whole beak or whatever. This is something that speed, like I was talking about earlier, is really powerful in, and if you can really focus in on this type of stuff, it's great. So check it out. So I'm gonna kind of detail this up. I'm gonna move a little bit faster, just so I can take this 5 minutes and actually make these changes that are reasonable and demonstrate what I'm talking about. I guess I could have took one of my earlier ones, but I wanted to do fresh drawings each take. But this will definitely simulate some sense of pressure. Obviously, this won't be a real life situation where my art director or directors you have 5 minutes to make these changes. I've never been in this position, and in fact, drawing in 5 minutes is unreasonable. You guys can use more time. 6 minutes. 6 minutes is way more reasonable. I'm just joking. Somewhere around like an hour to 2 hours is a good amount of time to kind of really finish one design to a really good quality. Like the stuff that you see, I think would be like 20% there. So I can usually get something pretty reasonable in about an hour or so if I really focus. And so right here, I'm just demonstrating like the value of like speed, because if you can get like a good sketch within the first few minutes, in this case 5 minutes, then it's really powerful overall. All right, so let's see what we can do here. So let's say my boss asks me to change the beak or move the beak up. So I'll just do that. I'll just basically say okay. And so again, speed allows this confidence that most people don't have, because if you don't have some sense of quickness, then making these changes are going to feel overwhelming and you just don't want to do them. A great example of this, I've been teaching myself programming, is that when I used to not be a programmer, you usually make these cases of like, it would be cool design, or what we should put into the game. And the programmers would always make a comment about like, well, that's so much work and all this stuff. And a lot of what they were saying is true, but I didn't understand why it was true and what was true about it. I started discovering that the reason why this is true is because many of the infrastructures or data structures basically were built around kind of like a house of cards. Basically, they built it in a way that might have been very destructive. So if they made some changes, it might have changed a lot of things. Or it just takes a lot of time to just go through a series of information. And how this relates to painting is like the same problem. Like if you spend all this time feeling like you're just walking on your toes, you're not really in control of every aspect of your painting, then making changes feels overwhelming. But if you practice speed helps you get to that. And so with programming, I'm practicing that same thing. I'm practicing like, okay, what are the fundamental ideas that I need to master and perfect, so that way I can make huge changes to my code if I needed to. Just like for me, it's like I have a strong foundation in anatomy, perspective, all this stuff, so it's easy for me to come in here and make some major changes because I painted it. So why can't I paint it again? And so you can see right here, I made those changes, moved the beak up, and it wasn't too big of a deal. Speed isn't just about like, getting something done quickly. It's also about making changes quickly. Because if you can paint something pretty fast, then you can make changes pretty fast. Either by just moving things around or adding new details or taking away details or just starting over entirely. And so the design challenges that may come will not feel so overwhelming, especially if it's in the scope of your skill, which it should be. If they hired you for your skill. If they hired you originally as a concept artist, but then they ask you to do gardening, yeah, I can see how that would be like, okay, well, I don't know how to do that. It's very unlikely that they'll ask you to do things out of your scope. So ultimately, what is my overall workflow? Here is 10 minutes, and I'm just gonna jump right into it. I like to just kind of lay in, I feel way less stressed. I like to lay in kind of my designs, and then I like to just like get a broad sense of the details instead of like just detailing. So for instance, like I'll just like draw this beak in, but then let's say I'll draw these squigglies to help me get a sense of like secondary and potential tertiary forms. But I never really get in there and paint too crazy. And then once I've had some good luck with the overall shape, then I feel confident just laying in some larger values. Once I feel that I have some good values, then I start to actually detail. And my detail still works in stages, so you'll notice that like I'm not necessarily going like hardcore with the detail, and I don't zoom in. Now I'm sure you guys heard of an artist named Marshall Vandross. Now Marshall, I went to one of his workshops, and one of the things that he said that I really love was he said, draw small to solve the big problems and draw big to solve the small problems. So basically, if you draw small at like this scale right here, then you're going to solve a lot of the major problems of your design. But if you zoom in like this, you're only solving tiny problems of your design. And I kind of stuck with that for like I don't know how many years. I'm going on to like maybe 10 years of just taking that lesson to heart, because he's been doing workshops for a while, and it was like, I think it was about 10 years ago. A lot of times I'll notice that if someone's painting is like all over the place, it almost always is because they had zoomed in way too much, and a lot of their painting suffered because of that. Once I laid in some basic forms and some basic design, then I'll start to actually paint in some strong textures. Yeah, check this out. So now we're getting somewhere. Surprisingly, this has only been 4 minutes. So what I'm going to do with that extra time is just straight up detail. And I'm going to try to really bring this concept home. One thing you'll notice too is I don't really have my interface up on Photoshop. And that's by design. Like, I actually prefer not to have my interface always around. I can paint with it around as well, but here's the thing. When you're painting and drawing with like traditional tools, there's very little interface, right? And all the interface is pretty much self-explanatory. Basically, like, whenever people will start to focus in on their tools, they get really distracted and they tend to like really make a ton more mistakes than they would if they didn't have all this interface. And so I usually tell people to like just kind of remove a lot of the interface from the very beginning and just learn new interfaces as time goes on. Like, if you didn't know how to use actions, you know, like, learn how to use actions. But if actions is already open by default, just close it. Like, you don't know how it works, just get rid of it. If you don't know how adjustments work, get rid of it. Just get rid of everything. Just start with like the basic stuff. If you have access to the internet, which I'm assuming you do if you're watching this video, anything that you might have needed from closing out, you can probably figure out from just going online. So now we have about 4 more minutes, so I'm going to really get in here. I'm going to zoom in just one more level. We're just going to make this head really, really nice. For me, like, you know, it's really important to master your tools because it allows you to free your mind and paint what's on your mind versus what's the right brush or what's the right button to push. You don't want to think about this stuff while you're painting. So how do you practice and mastering your tools? Well, you can basically watch plenty of tutorials online on specific tools. One thing that I like to do is try to make simple but really achievable things in the said tool. And if I feel comfortable within those parameters, it makes it easier. Like, so for instance, in Photoshop, you might want to try to paint clothing or do figure drawing or do something that you feel a little bit already pretty comfortable with. And then once you do that and just keep doing that until you feel comfortable, then try to challenge yourself with something a little bit more, you know, daring, like maybe like a creature or concept design of your own making. But again, if you weren't able to do it outside of the traditional media, like without digital media, like if you couldn't do it traditionally, it's not like Photoshop's going to all of a sudden make you be able to do it. Usually the problem that I see is people make that false assumption that when they're in concept, or once they're in Photoshop, they can now concept. If they weren't able to concept on 2D, then they're not going to be able to concept in 3D or in Photoshop or whatever tool that they tend to use. If they were to be able to concept pretty well in basically like paper and pencil, I've seen this, then it's just a tool thing. And I found that if I tell my students to practice like still life and just basic painting stuff and stuff that is really easy to kind of just master or basically wrap their mind around because they already have a good skill in that specific thing, then learning the tools will eventually allow them to do what they can already do in some other mediums. But if you don't know the tool, then what are you expecting? You wouldn't think that an oil painter can all of a sudden transition to watercolors really easily. They can transition, and if there's enough time given, they will eventually transition, and the skills that they have in oil painting will transfer over. But like, yeah, you know, if you can do chalk drawings, doesn't mean you can do ballpoint pen drawings, right? Or brush pen drawings. These things take time to acquire, like the tools. And then once you've acquired them, then yes, go for it. Let's try to make some good work. We're almost on the last minute. Let's try to like add some overall feeling of depth. I'm going to use a different brush. I've been using pretty much the standard round brush the whole time, but just because this is the last demonstration, I make it look fancy. And we have about 10 more seconds to go, but you know what? Those extra 10 seconds aren't necessary. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed these last pieces of concepts that I've done. Like I was trying to tell you guys, I've done these types of things many times, so do not feel overwhelmed by watching someone like me paint this. This is what I do for a living. I'm a professional. But it's taken me many years to practice this. And so I want to leave you guys with a few thoughts. practicing speed is not just to impress your friends or other artists. It's also really practical for obvious reasons, like you can pump out more work more quickly, you can iterate more quickly. But really what it does for you is that I think people don't realize is that it really helps build confidence in your skills. Because if you can do it pretty fast, generally you're pretty confident. And that confidence is really powerful because it makes you keep painting. And if you didn't know, that's what you got to do to get really good. So thanks again. I appreciate you guys for checking out my little tutorial that I did here. Hope you guys have a great one. And yeah, I'll see you guys around.